Whereas the theists who may be listening or viewing this may see it as what will happen when the feces hits the proverbial fan.
So, what are we talking about today?
We're talking about end of times. Let's discuss it. Like,
And when you say end of times, you mean
second coming,
the end of the
world
before the Savior comes back in a
returns.
Spiritual sense, as taught by the Mormon faith.
Or do you mean relativity
or
as taught by
church.
Einstein?
Not specifically the church.
Okay.
Because I think we could just
yeah.
talk about it broadly and all Christian religions
Armageddon,
as well as
Revelation,
like international religions.
Judeo-Christianity, Hinduism, Buddhism. Well, Hinduism is more of a
They don't believe
reincarnation.
in a second coming, do they?
That's what your question was, I assume. Yeah. So
But I think I'd be curious. I don't know. Do you know?
And what do
I don't
these
know.
current events mean?
I legitimately don't know. So like let's dig into some of those details today, but first let's like just ask the general question. What was everyone's vibe? Like where were you Wednesday for earthquake? Obviously most of us were probably in bed. Like any experiences like that for
Any
me,
experiences in bed?
I want to...
I think, well, the audience should know beforehand that we live in Utah, Salt Lake, Utah County, and there was an earthquake of 5.8 magnitude,
5.7
in
5.7.
magnitude.
Magna
That's all.
is
That's all we
5 to
needed.
10 miles west of Salt Lake City.
Combine
For
that with the
reference.
coronavirus, and we're all losing our minds.
Yeah, exactly. So it was just like it was an interesting morning. I got out of bed and like went to pick up a child, brought them back in bed with us, and as I was walking, I was like, something's going on. Like why am I off balance? And then set the child down to hear like the walls rattling and my bed rattling against the wall, and then I was like, honey, there's an earthquake. And she like sits up. I run to kids' bedrooms because I'm like, I either got to get them under their beds or, I mean, it was scary. And then it just was combined with everything that's going on pandemic wise. And I'm working from home and everyone I know is working from home. It was one of those moments where you're like, what's going on? You know what I mean? Like, what is going on? I'm like looking at my wife like, is this like, are we done? Are we wrapping up like Earth life? Like
It was such a bizarre thing for me. I have never experienced an earthquake while I've been conscious until this Wednesday morning. And my wife and I were just in bed. I think we were asleep or we were talking, or we were like in that in-between stage. When you're both awake and
you're both
talking.
awake, you're both talking, you're both in bed. That stage.
feel like there's
talking.
this is a very selective story picking.
I promise
bits.
I'm not editing it, not a single bit.
There was a lot of vibration going on.
Not to say, that we don't mind morning time goodness, but I'm just saying
Your
that
bed was rocking though. That's the point.
that is true.
Furniture was moving.
there was movement of the furniture.
all true statements.
Yeah.
I cannot deny it. But I remember just thinking it felt like I was in the movie Polar Express when the Polar Express pulls up and the house is shaking. But then there comes this split-second realization while it's happening where you realize there is not a Polar Express outside of my house.
That is
And I'm experiencing an
second I've
earthquake right now.
experienced.
So we just kind of sat
Multiple
there
times.
and just waited for it to go. And then it finally ebbed and went away.
Mm.
And it is, the timing of it all is remarkable because I remember I got to work and one of my coworkers is a former member of the church. And she was sharing an experience how her friend had texted her that morning and said, you know what, I think those effing Mormons are right. So it has been a pretty wild week. Lots of crazy stuff happening where you just feel like if there was an older sister or an older brother who could wrap their arms around the state of Utah, they'd be like, can't you see they've had enough? Back off.
like not to, and to add in the cultural spin that many may not understand this, but like the angel on top of the temple was holding his trumpet, the Salt Lake Temple,
Right.
and the earthquake shook the trumpet out of his hands. So like as a people,
As they're doing earthquake renovations on the Salt Lake
Exactly.
Temple.
as
Yeah.
an LDS
The
like
Mormons are right.
cultural idea, all of us all of a sudden start thinking like, what does that mean? You know what I mean? Like, this has meaning. Like the trumpet's
Wouldn't it be
out of
nice?
his hands.
Wouldn't it be nice,
Yeah.
Just put things in more of a simple format. What about you?
So, do you guys know when you go to a movie and right before the movie starts, there's that Dolby sound that's like,
Oh, yeah. I love that.
and there's this rumbling feeling.
That's what we're going for with Eye of the Storm.
To be honest, I didn't notice it at all. But
You were sound asleep.
but when I imagine it,
When I think about what it would have been,
I imagine how I feel when I hear the Dolby sound.
I honestly
at
thought
the
you were
movie
going somewhere
theaters.
deep. So do you guys apply meaning to any of this?
Oh, come on. I mean, how many 5.7 earthquakes are there on the planet in a given year?
Okay.
Probably like hundreds.
A lot. And this was not.
But how many
huge-
earthquakes in a given year happen to disrupt the structure of a religious building? Quite like it did in
Most
Salt
of
Lake.
them. Probably
just
most.
a trumpet. Just
Like
a
it's,
trumpet.
as a building as iconic as the Salt Lake Temple would be to a religious group
Sure,
like the LDS
sure.
Church.
Right.
Again, I'm not saying that in defense of it
Oh,
being a divine act.
Can I just say how many times I've been on Temple Square with family members and just heard oh, did you know that when the Salt Lake Temple was built, it was built on a structure because they knew that they'd have earthquakes, and the building is built to be able to, rumble and not crack. How many times I've heard that story, and then the trumpet falls out, and I'm just like, yes,
because the trumpet fell
Those are
out.
satisfying.
in your face,
moments.
Grandma.
TBH.
Because the trumpet fell
So
out.
I
There's
But
your
just
proof.
the trumpet. Just the trumpet. It was like, when I
know,
saw
it's
that, I was
is
like,
this like
does that mean we're going to the west now?
Well, that
because
was-
we're not going to Adamon Diamond?
the
I don't know.
the meme I put together was like,
Oh, right.
Angel Moroni just did a mic drop. You know what I mean? Which is like, well played.
The
But-
one oh
Yeah,
sorry.
go-
No,
no,
the one
go.
I
Did you
saw
just
that
say well played to your own joke?
Yeah, no, well played, Moroni.
Okay.
Well,
that was the
Well
joke.
played.
Okay.
No, and I saw the other one. I think I shared with you guys was the one where it was basically a dialogue between the angel Moroni and God, where the angel was like, "Can I do it? I want to do it. I'm gonna blow the trumpet." And he's like, "No, not yet." And he's like, "No, I'm gonna do it. I'm gonna do it." So
Yeah.
he causes the earthquake to get get the trump out of his hands.
That was a good one.
There's also one that was like, when Moroni's checking his watch, you gotta watch out for what's gonna happen next, because it just looks like he's looking like this. You know what I mean? Because there's no trumpet.
Well, there was
No trumpet
there was
in his
another
hand.
angle where it looks like he's like doing this fist pump, like power to the people. You know?
Yeah. And for those of you who are
Black
listening who maybe
Panthers.
have no context or reference to Angel Moroni, the temple, LDS beliefs, a quick Google search will show that there is a symbolic or a consistent use of the Angel Moroni in
Right.
everything to do. In fact, the logo on our app
Yeah.
for the LDS Gospel Library.
Branding.
Oddly enough, and we don't need to dig into this, I was reading this thing saying that it's not actually Moroni, but that we've given the angel that title
Interesting.
Let's
as Mormon.
dig.
Or yeah,
Let's
so
dig.
next
Someday.
another episode
Someday.
we'll dig. Not now, but we'll dig.
Okay, so going back to your question, does it have meaning?
Yeah. What
Should
does
we
this
go and
mean?
say, like,
what
yes
does
or
this
no?
mean? Yeah.
Yeah.
Jordan, what does it mean to you? Like, is this
On the
end of
spot.
times? Do these kind of events have some kind of like divine meaning, showing us that these are the end of times? Christ is coming soon. All of that.
Yeah, yeah. So I this reminds me of a story I heard about Boyd K. Packer, one of the apostles in the LDS Church, that went down. I think it was in the 80s, to a place in somewhere in South America where they had an earthquake, and all the saints, the members down there were wondering what this means. Because we've had 4 or 5 in the last year or so. And what he said, what this means is that you had an earthquake. And I'm kind of along those same lines, because I tend to, and I think we can all agree on this, I tend to see that many of the Orthodox members of any church will any church that believes in end times or Armageddon or whatever it might be, because of globalization and because of all of the news feed, the media, the instant information everywhere, they're seeing more of these
They're seeing more
devastations. They're
pandemics,
seeing
yeah.
more pandemics because it's dramatized.
Dramatized.
Dramatized. Thank you.
Dramatized.
Dramatized. And
More synonyms.
and I think that I've experienced this myself. Just kind of what would you say it? It's a certain type of bias where I'm just making a cognitive hook.
Mm-hmm.
So after high school, I remember thinking, drugs aren't even a thing anymore. Nobody does drugs.
Right.
It's like maybe the high school kids don't do drugs anymore, but it's because I was going to BYU. You know, and so
And if
but
they
I
were
thought
doing
it,
drugs,
I
they were
thought it
hiding it
applied
really well.
across the world. You know, it's like drugs are out. It's
Right,
great.
right.
So I get that impression that many people jump to conclusions that look at all this crazy stuff happening, and combined with the teachings that they were taught growing up, myself included, that these are the latter days and Christ will probably come during your lifetime.
Mm-hmm.
There's no doctrine that says that. In fact, the doctrine says you have no idea.
You have no idea
when
when
it'll
that's
come.
going to be. Yeah.
But because I was taught that, it is easy to jump to that conclusion, like Moroni's trumpet fell. Oh, but I really don't see this there. I don't see an escalation or a more consistency in these pandemics necessarily. Although with the combination of this COVID-19 and an earthquake in Utah, it's like,
It's so.
how do I ignore it? So
Well,
that's
I think what you say is spot on in terms of things being more visible. Like when in history, like, I always hear people like, look at the calamity, look at all the things happening in the news and the people rioting and all these different things. But the reality is, people have rioted for thousands of years, or there's been murder since as long as humans could murder. So the idea that things are increasing or escalating, I think
It's
is
false.
just that. Yeah, I just think it's that we can actually see it. We can
So-
see it with our eyes on our phones through
Right.
social media constantly.
Yeah. So I'm kind of a data junkie and look at a lot of statistics when it comes to this stuff, right? So some of the discussions and prophecies about the end times is there's wars and rumors of wars and famine and pestilence and all this chaos and the reality is that like there's never been a safer time to be alive. Lifespan is higher than it's ever been in the past. The number of people who die violent deaths because of war is a small fraction of the recorded history of man.
Yeah.
Literacy rates are high. Women have never had a better deal, right? They've never been created or
Been
seen
as
as equals,
equal, yeah.
Which still there's ways to
Work
go.
to be
Same,
done.
say that's
same
a
thing with
debatable topic.
minorities. Like there, for all intents and purposes, there's never been a better day to be alive in every facet except for a couple things. One, I would say, income inequality. Right? There's an issue with that. Psychologically, there's a lot of research talking about that. Depression rates are really high. Suicide rates are really high right now, and that has never been a thing. And essentially, all the research suggests that life is just so easy for us right now that
We want to die.
like hunter-gatherer societies and people in third world countries, they don't get depressed because everybody is going through something hard. But when you're living in a
camaraderie,
great country
connection.
and there's wealthy people and you're not doing well, then you feel like way worse, like
Yeah.
you're
The
isolated and
psychological
alone.
impact is huge.
Outside of that, like depression rates, suicide rates, mental illness issues, and
and more charitable
other
giving.
than those little things,
Yeah.
there's for every other statistic out there, there's never been a better time to be alive.
Mm-hmm.
Doesn't mean it's not
sounds like it's
perfect,
a
but
physically.
I also think that sometimes we can
Never been a
accidentally,
better time.
because of our personal belief system or bias, we can look at an event, let's say, an earthquake, and the trumpet falls out of a symbolic thing that we hold dear, right? So we look at that and we immediately apply meaning to something that happens, right? And I think that can be a little bit tricky to get past, right?
Why do we do that? Not to interrupt your thought.
I just
I have some
like I was
thoughts
saying,
on
I just
as to
think
why, but-
beliefs, right? And I'd love to hear your thoughts. But
I think it's I think it's nice to believe something, like to jump to a conclusion. Nice as in convenient. It seems like it's kind of a lazy way to go. Like, this means this, and that's it. Rather than, well, this could mean 20 different things, including perhaps the religious point of view.
yeah.
But there's usually much more to anything.
Well, and I could
And it's
say,
easy
like,
to
the
jump to a
earth
conclusion
shakes,
that it means one thing.
the earth shakes, and people get sick. You know what I mean? Like, the earth shakes and people get sick. How often is it that we have a major pandemic and an earthquake at the same time? Not very often. However, the earth shakes and people get sick. And to apply meaning and say that it's the end, I think probably could be unhealthy in some ways. And maybe thinking about it in from a different perspective is healthy. Zach, you're bottled up over there. Look
Yeah,
at
no,
you.
I've had a couple moments where I wanted to jump in on a couple
Cup
of
check.
statements, and hopefully I can remember everything that I want to share. But I do think that it is, certainly the case that even if you look at it from some of the prophecies that I'm aware of, it's going to take a whole lot more for us to get really close. Like, if I'm not mistaken, there's supposed to be a battle of Gog and Magog.
What does that mean? Can someone tell me what that means? Sorry.
It's basically the Battle of Armageddon. There's supposed to be millions of people involved in this war, and it's supposed to take place in Israel. I think this is a general Christian thought that we share.
Yeah, in
That
the bodies strewn
two
through the
apostles
streets.
should be dead in the streets of Jerusalem for 3 days, and that they'll come back alive, and that they will die after having held at bay like full armies. Like, so just imagine imagine what would need to happen for us to get to that point. So for me, I see these and I don't necessarily view that as, oh, we're really close now, right? Even though we do also have scriptures in the Doctrine and Covenants that say that we're at the doorstep. But again, the interesting thing that I think addresses some of what has been shared is we're trying to know and understand the mind of God. And,
We can't.
and we believe that. We believe that we don't know what God's thinking, even if you believe in him. And interestingly enough, too, is, as we're trying to understand the mind of God, it is possible that maybe 10 years from now, let's say the Battle of Gog and Magog happens 10 years from now, and we have a prophet writing scripture. It's possible that in that scripture he might record that God was angry with the church even, and struck down a statue, referencing the trumpet falling. So we don't know if that would be the case. It could be, and that might be something that's said. It might have nothing to do with it. And that's fine. So I guess if we're looking at it, I learned an interesting word this week, which was eschatology, which is, I guess, the theological study
One
of the,
very big word.
Very big word.
the end of the word, which it's
Huge.
funny how the word eschatology is very similar to the word
Jump on that
scatology,
opportunity.
right? Which is the study of feces. So I think for some of our atheist friends, they would
Okay,
view...
that was not what I was expecting. I thought you were going to...
No,
it's the study of meaning within couples or something.
No, I'm going somewhere. I'm going somewhere. So scatology
Is this
is the
getting
study...
back to the bidet conversation, Zach?
I can't stay away.
A scientific lens on the
rolling
bidet
it back.
You
conversation.
could say
Straight at you.
that my
You have
experiences
stock
with
in
a bidet have led me to become somewhat of a freelance scatologist. No, it's interesting in the sense that scatology is similar to the word eschatology. So I imagine that maybe some of our atheist listeners or friends might view eschatology as the study of the feces of our male bovine counterparts, whereas the theists who may be listening or viewing this may see it as what will happen when the feces hits the proverbial fan. And that was one of the most important thoughts that I wanted to
That
share
is
with everybody
so
today.
lyrical
That
and
will be
beautiful.
in-
Zach, you described eschatology to
Beautifully.
me as if I were 5. Could you do it as if I were 2?
So here we go. Big poop, little poop.
Big
No, I'm
poop,
just kidding.
little poop, poops scratched on walls. I saw your daily bit earlier. Great stuff.
Yes.
Oh yeah, check out
Your
Spence's
dog
daily
does not
bit.
pick up your
Daily
poop.
bit.
Let's put in a little poop
Wrap
plug.
it on the wall.
An ad.
So I think I might have lost track of where I wanted to go, but I
What
think
is
you
the
wanted to say
definition of
something.
eschatology?
Eschatology is it's within theology. It's basically all the theories about end time. So
okay, sure. The
end
study
of the world,
the study of and the end of the world,
right,
essentially.
the final destination of man, the planet Earth, whether that be cyclical or linear, that's
and that's
spread out
across all
across
religions.
all religions that believe in such a thing. Like, so I guess the cyclical stuff is the Hinduism, the Buddhism, that there's, this, breaking down, rebirth, and then linear, where, in the LDS faith, there's the earth will receive its paradisical glory and it'll become this, perfected location, and that people would be, exalted as well. And then, then we can move on also to maybe the more secular, the materialist views that talk about the end of the universe in relation to the Big Bang, that maybe the universe is spreading out, that it's going to experience what they call the Big Rip, where it just gets spread out so thin that space and time collapses or just gets spread out and rips, as they say.
I think it's important to acknowledge that a lot of that is still theory. And I've
Well,
been talking to
right.
But
And then
that's
because then there's also the big crunch, that the universe itself has kind of this cyclical expansion and crunching, and that eventually it'll crunch into the single zero whatever, and then explode again, and it'll reset the universe.
and the galaxy is on Orion's belt.
Sure. So there are a lot of different interpretation studies, evidences that point people into the directions and things that they believe. So eschatology is an interesting concept, and I do also want to go back to, maybe our more immediate cultural experience, in that we shouldn't be surprised that people in Utah, of all places, are going to view events like this coinciding
Religiously.
that it might have some divine representation.
Yeah.
Am I ready?
Well, I think here it would be interesting to actually. I got this website I want to pull up, but it's official. Utahns. This is the headline, right? It's official. Utahns are #1 panic grocery shoppers.
267% growth week to week in terms of shopping, I think it was. We spent $1,500 last week on groceries.
So you're part of the problem.
Sorry, guys.
But I think
how much I
think
spent?
that's interesting.
20.
It shows
Actually, more than-
a thing that's happening, right? It's what are you whispering about over
I
there?
was just criticizing of him
Oh,
talking.
I apologize.
I'm
I talk way
mumbling
too
to
much.
myself.
And
I actually shopped. I only spent $15.
Can we see your Can we see your Bill Belichick impersonation?
Yeah, give it to us real
Tom
quick.
Brady has been a great leader for this team, and
You sound like Obama.
do I?
You had a
What
similar
we're going to do
cadence.
is build bridges and roads, and the stimulus package will help us all.
We really
Thank you,
jumped.
Senator Romney. Yes,
Where
we
the
really
hell
jumped.
are we?
we really jumped. Okay, so
My fault.
Utahns are #1 panic grocery shoppers. So it gave this map, which we could pull up, but the increase of Utah, 261% increase in grocery shopping over the past, I don't know how long it is.
I think
but
it's a week. I think
yeah.
it's a week.
Yeah.
What's the next closest state?
The next closest
Other than
state
spam,
is
Like New Jersey?
Montana, 101.
New Jersey over there?
Oh yeah, you're right. 124.
Double.
124.
We doubled
we
the
doubled
next
them.
closest state.
So my question to all of you, because this
As
is
to
this
why.
is
It's the
interesting.
end. Let's
That's-
stock up.
Isn't that, as Mormons, members of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, shouldn't we have some kind of semblance of peace and not fear for
Well,
the future? Do you feel like this is a stat that shows how scared we are or how prepared we want to be? What are your
it's
thoughts?
a
'Cause there's two.
combination of a lot of things, especially the prophet's admonition that we stock up and have
Yes.
food storage. But why? It seems to me that it looks like that many people didn't have food storage because they bought so much.
We were talking about that before the show, where we were just talking about how there's such an immediacy of the impact that our teachings have on us, that we're not. We talked about this last episode where you said, I think anything more than a month storage might be excessive, but
Well,
we've
in
actually,
comparison to other people.
of course,
Right,
no, and that's not the point I'm getting at. More so that we've been taught to have a year's worth, right, as a backup. So when you look at a group of people in a state who are trying to have a year's worth, and maybe some of them don't have it, then when they feel like the age of fire and brimstone may be close, then perhaps they're going to go for a year's storage when they go shopping that time after an earthquake and a pandemic. Whereas other people might be thinking, let's get to the month.
Yeah.
So we go when we feel like we're underprepared for something that we've known about for a long time. I think we go beyond where most people would go. And I think that kind of explains that data.
Yeah. And I would agree with that. I just think sometimes it's interesting to look at it from a different perspective where I feel like and you might know this quote. I don't know it exactly, but it was from I'll have to look it up. I'll share it in a different thing. But the point is, it says essentially every religion has predicted, the end of times, and every religion has been wrong. You know what I mean? Or it hasn't happened yet. You know what I mean? So it's always like on this doorstep. It's right here. It's coming close. There's a Joseph Smith quote that says, in his 80th year, Christ will come again. Well, you know what I mean? Those kind of things are predicted. I think sometimes it can play into even my fear. Let me be vulnerable here. I felt fear. And I was like,
did you really
what?
feel fear?
Yeah.
About what? Because when I felt the earthquake,
Mine is really based in
family.
Yeah, family and like my children and what world are they going to be raised in? Are they going to be raised in a world where, we can use US currency and go buy food and eat at Taco Bell? You know what I mean? Like, or are they going to be raised in a different
Where
environment?
they don't
Like,
have
how is
access
this all
to
going to look?
internet
Or
pornography and all that.
yeah,
great
all that
stuff.
great stuff.
So you're concerned about the possibility that your kids might have to be raised the way that every single human was until like the last 50 years.
Right, exactly. I want them to have my standard of living. But I mean, no, I just it is. There was fear in my brain that swirled during, the earthquake happens. I'm sitting there in bed, I'm looking at my wife and I'm thinking, what's going on? Like how do I need to be better prepared. And there just was a lot of like thoughts and maybe not fear might not be the best word, but like, what do I need to be doing right now? Like, what is my next best action, in this circumstance? So I don't know.
No, I think that's a great question, and appreciate you being vulnerable for sure. Just because
You guys were all like, you're a sissy.
No.
Thanks.
Because when you started touching on the subject of, what kind of a world am I destined to experience? It reminds me of the line from Lord of the Rings, Fellowship of the Rings, when Frodo says, I wish the ring had never come to me. I wish none of this had ever happened. And Gandalf says, so do all who see such times, but that is not for them to decide. What they have to decide is what to do with the time that is given to them.
Why would you
And
go
so
halfway into a Gandalf quote and then forget the voice?
Because he forgot.
I just was being a little too
You were
dramatic,
trying
and
to-
I didn't want that to be too much of a distraction.
It sounded just like Ian McClellan.
My favorite Samwise
So-
Gamgee quote.
And I think that that's interesting because we're talking about stuff that we can't control. No matter what your belief system is, and no matter how good we may have it right now, generally speaking, we could be one pandemic away from wiping out 70% of the planet. And then who knows what we would look like from there, right?
Italy.
And it is interesting because I think it does have an impact of, what would we do if the world as we knew it collapsed?
Right.
Because, maybe that could happen. I mean, we're so dependent on, electricity, about water coming through our faucets. Mm-hmm. We don't know how to find water. Mm-hmm. We don't know how to build a well. We don't know some of us don't know how to cleanse water. We don't know how to make things safe to eat. I mean, if tomorrow just there was a massive earthquake and everything collapsed, like what would we do?
Right.
What would happen? What would happen to our morals? What would happen to, everything that we knew? I just wonder what that would look like, where we just lose this connection with the rest of the world and that globalization isn't there anymore. But also, I think it is interesting when you point out all these examples of times when the world has been predicted to end, including the Mayan calendar 2012. And I have a little infographic in front of me that talks about at least 182 different times when the world was supposed to end and didn't. And then if you look into I guess you could maybe say stratification within the data, it says that of those 182, 13 of them were cosmic events that were predicted that, an asteroid or something was on a crash course and was going to wipe out the Earth as we knew it. There's 49 miscellaneous calamities that, of course, would be fun to look into, 6 natural disasters, 61 religious prophecies, 14 human disasters, and 39 recalculations of past erroneous predictions. So lots of different things, and it would be interesting to kind of dive into each one of those and learn about all the different ways that humans have tried to make sense of the destiny of the world and humanity. And I think that's a lot of why people try to, ascribe events to meaning. Yeah. We want it to mean something. Mm-hmm. But again, we have confirmation bias at play, and I don't know where I'm going with this thought
And,
really,
well,
other
I
than just
think-
acknowledging
I
that
think what
that's
you were
happening.
saying also is that a lot of people reacted to this differently, and a lot of people were actually like excited. So I just got off the phone with my brother, and he was saying, dude, a week ago I was stoked. Actually, well, I'll go into that a little bit. He was like super excited that there was going to be this like zombie apocalypse, and he was going to have to climb the mountains of the Sierras because he lives in California and like snipe them out, and then like live in a cave, and he was all excited. And then after like a week of just like sitting at home, he's just like, this sucks, But I find that a lot of people kind of get excited, not necessarily for the same reasons. And I'm right there with my brother, because I'm a single man that can afford to live in a cave. But I think a lot of people jump to a conclusion as well because it means something's going to change in their life. And people like a little bit of change, I think. People, when they see that an adjustment has to be made and maybe responsibility can be removed from them in a way that exists currently that they are not a fan of, that seems like an exciting prospect in their mind. And so if it means the end of the world's coming and Jesus is coming and the millennial's about to happen, et cetera, I can see why a lot of people would enjoy that.
I will say, I think it made my parents uncomfortable actually when I said it, because I'm of the stance that nobody knows, right? Nobody knows what the future holds or how things pan out. Nobody has a crystal ball. Nobody's being told exactly when the world ends. That's kind of my stance. And I think scripture would kind of support that thought as well. But so I said, here's what I think the future holds. I think I will grow old and die. And then my kids are going to grow old and die. And then their kids are going to grow old and die. And then, you know what I mean? Like, I just think, and maybe that is a bad perspective, but I really do. Not that I don't believe in a higher power or that there's not life after death, but I think we hold the world to a unrealistic time stamp and say that, for some reason, all of this, God's going to shut off the valve and all the people that were supposed to come to the planet are no longer coming, you know what I mean? Or we're all out of people now, I just don't know how that all plays into.
So, I was just thinking, it's interesting because I think we wonder what this all means, and we've already said that many times, but I think about doing my best to understand, if I can try, maybe the practicality behind these messages that have been sent down through the scriptures, in whatever religions there may be that believe in the second coming or a judgment day or something like that. I think that it'll happen. It'll be something whenever it happens.
So you think like there will be an event of some kind that
I believe that the scriptures are true. So I think when they say this battle of Gog and Magog will happen, then I think that that's going to be carried out.
Do we know where that is? Is that in the Old Testament, New Testament? Do we know?
I don't remember actually.
Or is that like Book of Revelations or?
I don't remember honestly where it is, but I guess what I'm really getting at is, as far as I can understand from what scriptures and those who have been my religious mentors in my life, the length of your life doesn't matter. The circumstances of your life don't matter. The time in Earth's history doesn't matter. The principles, of the gospel of faith in Jesus Christ, baptism, all those things, when they were taught in the dispensations that we're aware of, you had the information that you needed to live a life that was fulfilling and beyond the scope of, your mortal existence and the physical existence of this earth even, and that's something that I think makes it to where, it's not about, you better get your stuff together because God's coming, as much as, there is an end so, the timing of it and whoever's on the earth and however many people there are and what circumstances, that's not the important thing as much as it is, have you spent the times of your probation in a way that allowed you to be connected to Christ, feel the gospel, become converted, love your fellow man, love God, those kinds of basic things.
I have a question for you, Zach, and I kind of wanted to see if I can premise this with some of the interpretations that I've heard in Sunday school, etc. A lot of the scripture in Revelation gives these scenarios that are more according to what they understood the world to be at the time it was written, or John, I guess, at the time it was written, that a lot of people now, and I've heard this discussed in Sunday school or wherever, they interpret certain things to mean specific things. So, for example, I think helicopters are something that says something about giant dragonflies will possess the sky, and people are like, that means
that's helicopters. Yeah, I've heard that
and
same thing in Sunday
school.
school.
And people jump to conclusions, and I wanted to ask how much of these stories are spiritual symbolism in your mind versus actual literal happenings, because I'm actually under that impression that the same, that those two apostles and their bodies will be strewn through the streets. That doesn't seem like a symbolic. That seems very much literal,
A specific thing.
But when it comes to the miracles wrought and the actual events, it seems to me like there's a lot of symbolism. So, not that you could give a specific example or go delve super deep into it, but do you see most of these prophecies as literal, or on a spiritual plane that means something symbolic?
I think as far as my personal discipleship is concerned, I think that I don't know a lot about whether those interpretations would or should be literal or symbolic. But again, I mean, I certainly believe that it enriches, and I think, Christ said in the New Testament that, when you see the plant doing something, that it's a sign, right? And so that's a pattern that we've seen, that, he tries to drop hints that things are happening, that summer is nigh or something like that, right?
Yeah.
Wish I had the reference there.
The wheat and the
but
tares.
again, I think that when it comes to the core principles of the gospel, I don't think that we're going to be judged on our interpretation of Gog and Magog. I don't think we're going to be judged on what we believed about every single facet of the gospel, as much as we'll be, judged on the state of our souls. What did we do? What kind of a person were you? Did you care about people? There's some fairly common quotes within the church today that we would be surprised by who we see there and surprised who we don't see there if we get there, right? So it's just, we want it to be black and white. We want it to be cookie cutter. We want it to be plain, but it's not. And
So what's interesting to me, though, about what you're saying is there are there are statements where we get kind of specific about, let's say within Mormonism, about how we'll be surprised about who we see and who we don't see. And I feel like that's kind of like you win either way with a statement like that, but we can sometimes get specific.
Win in what way, though?
Meaning I mean, how do you know that? If you're saying you'll be surprised by who you see and you'll be surprised by who you don't see, and you're like, maybe you get to the other side and you do have a moment where you're surprised by someone you saw and you're surprised by someone you don't saw. So it's like this
Again, I
really
think,
generic, easy
Sure.
to win prophecy. You know what I mean? Like,
Sure. I
there
mean,
will be
it's
calamity.
It's not something that you can prove to be false until it happens, right? Which then makes the importance of knowing not important, because it's already happened, right?
See,
So to me, again, I think it's focusing on the practicality of saying these kinds of things and the messages that some people choose to believe or not to believe, even those who are members of the church. I think it's more about gathering this understanding of what's important.
Right.
So really what somebody's saying when you're saying you'll be surprised by who is and isn't there, I think it's just another way of saying, don't judge a book by its cover.
Right.
or you don't know what somebody else is going through. They don't know what you're going through. We all hope to be good enough for whatever that thing is that we believe is our standard.
Right.
So I have another question that tie back into the main topic. Do you guys believe that an education on the signs of the times, an education on the end, do you believe that furthering our education in that way can help ourselves spiritually at all, or emotionally, or physically, or is it just fear mongering?
Brian,
Brian,
I need to hear.
No.
well
No.
said.
No.
I like
To
that
what?
answer.
Today's question.
And why do you think that it's not necessary to? I mean, because I personally believe we jump to conclusions as to what things mean, and I don't think that is a good thing.
Mm-hmm.
But if we can be solid on something that is going to happen, which it may or may not be provable from the scriptures, but is there any sort of way that this could be beneficial to us to be educated on what to look for, what to not look for? And I'm not going for any specific answer. I don't have any agenda.
I mean, from a religious standpoint, where obedience means obeying, following certain laws and commandments, etc., there are several reasons why people follow religious teachings. One is because they feel some type of love for the deity that they believe in. Another is that they are scared of punishment. And so I do think that a lot of people, including myself in the past, have been obedient because of fear. Mm-hmm. And I do think a lot of the panic that we're seeing with, how people are reacting in Utah to the coronavirus is because we as mammals and we as conscious beings have a very strong instinct of self-preservation. And that drives a lot of our behavior and a lot of our thought process. So, yeah.
Yeah. So, and I'm of the opinion that doing anything out of a motivation, out of fear motivation, is not the right motivation. It usually leads to worse things.
Can I just
Personally,
say to agree with Brian that and probably with you maybe in this respect, I just think that any lesson I've had in Sunday school about the end of times, or all of that, it's not very edifying for me.
Yeah.
It's not an experience where I enjoy.
Amen.
Like it's just like all of this is so this will happen and this has to happen and this has. Remember the old gospel doctrine manuals, and it said
this is the chronology of the Armageddon. Bruce Willis will come.
Yeah, exactly.
Then, yeah. Keep going, sorry.
There's just that kind of stuff that's not very edifying for me. I feel like it's it doesn't mean I don't think it's important for us to be prepared for bad things that could happen in the future. That's not what I'm saying at all. I'm just saying it's more edifying for me to focus on blessing my own life through living good principles that make me happy, and teaching those principles to my family and anyone that's in my circle, because I feel like that's what's actually important. It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter when, if someone will, apostles will die in the streets. I'm not trying to be insensitive, but I just don't think that matters in terms of how I try to live principles in my life. So I feel like sometimes a focus on that or getting too caught up in that can be, it can drive a lot of fear.
Yeah.
And
so why do you think it's in the scriptures? Sorry, I'm asking too many questions.
No, I agree. That's a great question. Why is it in the scriptures?
Because I agree. I don't feel edified, nor do I see that as really relevant to my own personal life or spirituality. So.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. I mean, I think I think there are, if you look at the gospel of Jesus Christ, or if you look at Old and New Testament scriptures, it's not all love, sunshine and roses, right? And I don't think it's that way because it's, seeking to scare someone into righteousness. some would argue that that is the case, right? That religion is used as a tool to control, societies, or a tool
Sometimes
that's
there's
been-
scriptures that can sound just like a fear-based
Of
target.
course.
But
Well, and they talk about God's wrath, right?
Yeah, exactly.
So, but I mean, we also have, our parents' wrath, and yet at the end of the day, we love our parents, right?
Mhm.
Because there are certain things that our parents didn't want us to do for a variety of reasons. Some of them were good, some of them weren't good. But a lot of them generally came from a place of what we would describe as imperfect love. And if you're a Christian, I believe that most Christians believe that God is benevolent, right? And that when he extends these warnings, it's not out of just this triggered, angry
Anger.
response, right? But actually a token of his love, that he's trying to tell you that there are good and bad ways to live your existence, and that it matters. Basically, that's something that I think is something that is debated a lot. Whether or not your choices matter, whether or not it affects a soul. And we're getting into questions that we could devote a million episodes to. But I also did think that it was interesting from what Brian said specifically about the contrast between some people choose to believe and follow a God because they love him, right? Whereas others maybe are fearful. And there's a talk from General Conference in 1984, quick plug by Dallin H. Oakes, that asks the question, why do we serve? And he actually provides 6 different levels of obedience, with the first and I guess introductory level of obedience being fear, like fear of punishment. And then it progresses into like
Duty.
Yeah.
Is that next?
I think so. There's duty. No, but I don't remember exactly what the order is. I think duty is in there. But there's also belief of a temporal reward, then like belief of an eternal reward, and that you kind of, in his, belief that you kind of can progress through these levels to ultimately get to love. You do it because you love Heavenly Father, and you believe, you truly believe, you have that conviction. And I think that what makes some people who are, I guess, on the more agnostic side uncomfortable is that as soon as you decide to have a conviction of something, you're making a truth claim. You're saying that, I believe, or I know that this thing is the way that one should live their life. And while I acknowledge that you can live your life however you want, I believe that this is the desirable way to live.
For you.
Yeah. For that. That's what, when
what
somebody
they're
has a
saying
conviction,
is
that's what they're saying. That
for
I believe
everyone.
that this is the way to be. And some of them say that some might say this is how I see it. But I think that even people who say that may not have a perfect conviction in that they probably still maybe get irritated by people who choose to not do things the way they do it. And I just wonder how capable we are
definitely.
as human beings to be truly technically agnostic. But
Yeah.
I've met very few, and they're all online, so I haven't met them.
Well done.
No, actually, I
Well
have a
played.
friend, and he's quite agnostic. You can tell. He's just like, I don't know.
So
I don't know.
Who are you talking about, Jordan?
Mike Duthry.
We'll
And
bleep-
Brian
Is
Madsen.
Is that a real
bleep-
person?
We'll bleep that out. Mike Duthry. If that's a made-up name, well done. If that was a made-up name.
No, it wasn't.
Oh, okay.
Wait, why would you guys think I was lying about
Oh,
that?
I don't know. Well, it's just because you were like, is that a made-up name?
I thought you were talking about me, but you didn't want to say it. So,
No,
That's right.
no, but actually, you are close.
so I'm starting to look at religious ideals and frameworks very similar to diet, right? We've gone over the past 50 years from a carb-based diet to a fat-based diet to fat makes you fat, and we've gone through so many cycles, and guess what? Now we're learning here in 2020, maybe the diet that's right for me based on my ancestry is actually the wrong diet for someone else, right?
The time traveler dietitian.
So we're finding that diets are very specific to an individual and how their body responds to certain things, which is linked back to their usually genetics through their ancestry, right? And what their ancestors 3,000 years ago were eating. From a religious standpoint, there are those, and the Mormon faith does this, right, where we have the truth and it is right for everybody, right? There are many other people and other ideals, and I don't know if there's faiths that believe this, but I see a lot of people have an approach that's this is something that's right for me, I feel like I kind of follow that. You know, I grew up in the church and love the church and follow a lot of the principles, and they're good and they add value to my life. But there are a lot of things that the church doesn't do for me that I need, right? And I've learned that exercise and all these other things and diet and nutrition and taking deep breaths a few times a day and just doing other things that aren't typically involved in a religious context that add value to my life. So truth claims are dangerous, I think, on an objective level as to how everybody should live. But in terms of individual truth claims based on my personal experience, I don't think that's dangerous at all. So,
and I would hope we're moving into like a space where, I love what you just said, Brian. Like we're moving into a space where there are different ways to Mormon. You know what I mean? I hope we're moving into like territory where it's okay to have disagreements. It's okay to maybe not agree with a certain person's opinion, and that's not looked down on, or like that you don't disapprove of another person's opinion because you think it might be wrong based on your Mormon orthodoxy framework or something. Like I really see that we're progressing as a church and hopefully opening our arms to different ways of believing. At least that's the way I hope. I hope Mormonism progresses. You know what I mean? Like I look at we're making steps toward LGBTQ youth and or anyone in that manner, and we're making steps toward being more transparent and all of those things. I just hope that over time there are different ways to Mormon than just one orthodox perfect way.
That's an interesting statement, because when you said it, and I've heard many people say that we're making progress. But when you said it, I got the vibe that yes, that is true, and I'm totally on board. There are some times where people are like, oh, they're making progress. It'll be a grand and glorious day when, you know, the LDS Church comes out and says these two transgender people can marry in the temple and whatever it might be. And I think that there's a lot of doctrine progress that isn't being made or never will be made necessarily. And then there's a lot of like how we apply the doctrine, the practices that totally is changing and for the better. Yeah, I completely agree. But I hear that, and it depends on who's saying it, and it sounds different.
Yeah.
But
and I guess from my perspective, like as I've come across, you know, these different topics, I know that, you know, there was and has been a time where it wouldn't be, people just wouldn't be willing to have these conversations. And I think that what we're really trying to go for is a willingness to talk about these subjects, because,
and it's going to get harder than this.
Oh yeah,
right? Like these are we're kind of scratching the surface of some of these things, but
we are.
Over time we'll dig.
Yeah, but I think what I feel like I want to say right now is that there may have been some cultural shortcomings that people have ascribed as the church or as the doctrine. And there are some conversations that probably can't be had in a Sunday school meeting, right. Or, you know, in just a general discussion. And I wish that it was, you know, with both, I guess, arguments coming at it from, you know, can we understand each other? Is it possible that the common ground that we can find is going to be something that enhances doctrine that already exists? I guess you could say that it's my belief that despite all of this dissonance in the interpretation of doctrine, how it's applied, and the realities that we deal with today, I guess I believe that ultimately we will actually come to a resolution, and that it will be something to where people are not obligated to believe it, but people can understand why people choose to believe it, and why people choose otherwise.
Right.
And just be willing to accept the agency of each person, which is a very crucial element in the belief that, you know, it is unrighteous to exercise dominion and and over another person.
Mm-hmm.
That is not something that is viewed as valuable or important,
Right.
within the LDS Church. So,
Do you feel like we are improving in that aspect? Like, do you feel like we're making progress, Brian? From your perspective, do you feel like the church has made strides toward opening dialogue that may be not as orthodox in thinking?
I think it depends on how it's defined. I mean, if you look at, here's an example. If you look at the political spectrum, at least in the United States, there's two sides, right? There's a liberal side, and there's a conservative side. And the job of the liberal side is to drive change for change's sake, almost, regardless if it's good or bad change. And the conservative side, their purpose is to slow down change as much as possible, but ultimately fail. But they hope to fail slowly, as slow as possible.
I think a really good metaphor for that.
I think that's what's happening in religion as well. Specifically within Mormonism.
Each generation comes in and has a little more, we
So blacks can't have the priesthood until we're forced. Okay, fine. Yes, they're equal. Yes, we'll give them the priesthood. Now the world is ready for it. Why do men have the priesthood but women can't? Well, women really do have the priesthood if they pray, but they don't want the priesthood anyways, right? It's just more work. In that, I feel like slowly over time, the conversation is changing in response to cultural pressures. And, going back to the kind of end times conversation, the picture that is painted is that the world is going to get so terrible. People are just going to be just demons on earth, right?
Bloodthirsty.
Whereas I would argue that there's never been more moral, like a stronger moral framework. Like if a woman wanted to be in the workforce, 60 years ago and didn't want to be a stay-at-home mom, she was essentially outcast from society, right?
Don't you think that had
more
to do with contraception and technology?
Well, I mean that's an example, right? So we won't dive too much into that.
Sorry.
But I mean, just 15 years ago, it was okay. I mean, 20, 30, 50 years ago, it was okay to think less of someone because of how they looked, right? And guess what? That's not okay anymore. So I think there is this, I don't know, going back to the end of times conversation, that the picture of like stuff is going to get so terrible. Like, I feel like people in general are so much better than they've ever been before.
Mm-hmm.
They care about everybody else's well-being.
Life expectancy.
I mean, it's
is
different.
Longer,
Life expectancy is longer, but in general, like we're so much more accountable to acting in a way that we all feel is correct. I don't know. I just don't see the trend. And from a personal standpoint, the idea of the end times is that Satan will have grasp of the hearts of men, right?
Yeah.
And even though I still go to church most Sundays, over the past couple of years, my belief system has very much distanced itself from believing in a deity or the Mormon faith. And based on the scriptural context, if I'm not praying and if I'm not reading the scriptures, I am under Satan's control, right? But yet I still don't have a desire to look at pornography or cheat on my wife or become an alcoholic or do any of these things. And I still have this desire to be service-minded and help people. So my personal experience with the not only the prophecies, but kind of the message of Satan's going to win until Heavenly Father comes back, on a personal level, it just doesn't ring true to me.
Yeah, ring true.
So, yeah.
And I think,
but what do I know, right?
and I think that's a good thing to say, at the end, because I mean, I think the situation of the world has always changed, And we could even use the example of, Christ in his day. If we recall the experience of when the woman was taken in adultery and brought to Christ, and they're like, the law says that that such should be stoned. And I think in today's day and age, we would look at stoning somebody who's guilty of adultery as a bit excessive.
Just
right?
teensy.
Can we? I
And
think.
it's only
Can we
women
all
that they would
agree
stone.
right now that is excessive?
Yeah.
That you shouldn't stone somebody for committing adultery with giant stones until they're crushed and bludgeoned
And
to
dead.
death. Right?
Yeah.
Is that? Do we believe that that's a?
Well, I mean, no. I'm just
You're
kidding.
you're making me want to say I totally believe that.
The law doth
correct.
say it, Zach.
So, I just think it's interesting. We don't have an explicit statement from Christ saying stoning's wrong. All we have from him is, "He who is without sin cast the first stone." So I think we see this, what we believe to be a perfect individual within Christianity, operating within the social framework of the time.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that that's an indicator that, again, to try to look at a church and hold it accountable. Again, I think I've said this in other discussions, is I think people say like, well, the church didn't call the emergence of the interpretation of same-sex attraction. The church wasn't ready for it. Or polygamy due to social pressures, or, blacks in the priesthood. And again, I would argue that if you had such a church that had a spotless record, no controversy, no missed prophecies, no messy leadership, nothing. Again, I think that would challenge the first principle of the gospel, which is faith, right? You're just like, well, this church doesn't make mistakes, so how can it be wrong? I think that we need to be careful with, generalizing things. I don't think that conservatism is as simple as I'm not saying that it's completely inaccurate, right? But, that liberalism is progress for progress' sake, whether it's good or bad. And conservatism is always helplessly and hopelessly resisting
Pumping the
change,
brakes
right?
as hard as they can.
And I think that,
Driving at a
most
speed
people, as
limit.
far as America is concerned, I think a lot of people find themselves kind of in the center of the spectrum, more moderately minded. And it is polarized, and there are people who are on the extreme ends of the spectrum, right? Again, I just, the connection I guess I'm trying to bring to all of this is that life was never intended to be clear. And we were never meant to understand things. And we were, and like, if you look at yourself growing up, there were things that your parents taught you that did not ring true to you, that did not make sense at the time.
So what does that
like
say?
Cod liver oil.
What
being
does that
fed to
say
you by
about a
spoon.
God if he gives you a riddle where you're never meant to find the answer to? That seems a little cruel to me.
In what sense? So you're
So
saying,
as you just said, we're never meant to know the answer. Essentially, we're never meant to know.
we're never meant
It
to
was never
know.
meant for us to
we're,
know.
we're meant. I would
I would
switch
say
it around
that
a little
would be
bit
the
and
case,
say
though, for
we're
mortal
meant
life.
to know enough.
Mm.
We're not meant to know everything, and it's not that we're supposed to have something withheld as much as we're supposed to know enough.
I think, to bring it back, I really think that in these times specifically, like, I think it's important to maybe pump the brakes on fear and look at the world through a more optimistic lens, because I think that brings more joy. And I don't think that, the church by any means, tries to put a lens of fear on anything. In fact, I think, they're trying their very best to put an optimistic spin on all of these things. And so my final thoughts would simply be, look, scary things happen. The earth shakes and people get sick. People fight. People die. Bad things happen. You know what I mean? To good people, they happen to bad people. But let's just do our best to, like, switch the fear of lens with a little bit of fear of optimism and recognize truly how blessed we are. You know what I mean? And that we have the means to be able to bless the lives of people around us, because I think that's what's most important, no matter what the beliefs are.
So if you have extra toilet paper, give it to your neighbors.
Or just buy a bidet.
It's already
Follow
been
the
done. I
Matt's
think most of our
example.
supply has already been given out.
Buy a bidet.
Don't ask me. I won't give you any.
Yes, you will.
Zach has a bidet. He's volunteering anyone to use it.
To come
You
sit
know,
on
in
his
some ways,
toilet.
I
I
do
have big
feel like I
trees
need to
in the backyard.
Is it the word evangelize?
Evangelize.
Evangelize.
Evangelist size.
You saying that
cool.
almost gave me the thought, like, yeah, we should have some people come over, and I'll be like, listen, we'll just close the door. You just give it a try. I'm not going to try to
You're
force
gonna
it
be
on
a
you. I just
door-to-door
want you to
bidet
feel the
salesman.
joy that I feel. The cleanliness. Oh. Is all you have to do to make it real. Then you wouldn't have to say that you love me. I'm not going to look at you when I say that.
I love you,
Just making straight up eye
'Cause I'd already know. Anyways.
And that's the end of times.